The next lockdown is already planned, and it will be worse than COVID. Soon, using a Bitcoin mixer will get you labeled a cyber criminal. And the laws are already written, you just don't know it yet. In this video, Whitney Webb lays everything bare for everyone to see.
They have made it very clear in media reports, press releases, and policy documents that they see financial privacy, the popularity of Bitcoin, and the value of Bitcoin as direct threats responsible for what they define.
The next lockdown is already in motion. To understand what this means, we have to look at a recent development where a bipartisan group of U.S. senators introduced the Financial Technology Protection Act. At its core, it creates a working group to study how terrorists and criminals use cryptocurrency. It will then hand proposals directly to Congress and regulators. That sounds neutral, until you look at who sits on it.
This working group would be composed of representatives of the U.S. Treasury Department, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, the IRS, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, the Department of State, and the CIA.
Every major law enforcement and intelligence agency in the U.S. will be in one working group, pointed at Bitcoin. But is it all just about regulation? Well, the justification narrative is already being built too.
As the DOJ in particular has attempted to paint Bitcoin as the payment of choice for well-known terror groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, signaling that this working group proposed by this bill will likely seek to specifically target Bitcoin.
Webb also talks of how the media is unknowingly advancing the agenda of Bitcoin becoming a currency of choice for terror organizations.
Mainstream media reports, which cite Treasury and FinCEN officials, DOJ officials, and CIA analysts, have claimed that, quote, terrorists are turning to Bitcoin and they're learning fast. That Bitcoin is the, quote, new frontier in terror financing.
So the legislation is being written and the narrative is being fed to the masses. But who is actually coordinating all this? Most journalists see the legislation, get to the narrative, report on those, and stop at that. But Webb knows one thing these journalists overlook. The devil is in the details. So she went one layer deeper, because the agencies writing these laws are not acting alone.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, many of the groups looking to allegedly combat cybercrime in the U.S. and beyond, including the Department of Justice and the FBI, are part of an international public-private partnership housed within the World Economic Forum that is seeking to define these terms in unsettling ways.
The thing is, the DOJ is part of an international public-private partnership housed inside the World Economic Forum called the WEF Partnership Against Cybercrime, or WEF-PAC. And WEF-PAC is where the real policy is being written. You would expect WEF-PAC to be made up of purely government agencies, but the guest list paints an entirely different picture.
They also include massive too-big-to-fail banks, like Bank of America and Santander, as well as massive tech companies like Amazon and Microsoft. PayPal is also there, so is the nonprofit that manages the SWIFT payment system.
Now, WEF-PAC wants to target and seize infrastructure that enables anonymous crypto transactions. They also want to shut down websites hosting what they call criminal content. And it turns out that there are cleverly hidden details in this policy, details that almost nobody else has noticed.
Shockingly, WEF-PAC calls for this cooperation to take place even if it is not, quote, always aligned with existing legislative and operational frameworks. In other words, they are saying this cooperation should be allowed to take place even if it is illegal.
And it gets even worse. WEF-PAC does not just define cybercrime superficially, the usual ransomware or hacking attacks. It goes further than that.
To WEF-PAC, cybercriminals also include those who use technologies to uphold terrorism and spread disinformation to destabilize governments and democracies.
That's definitely the first step towards creating an environment where online censorship, especially of independent media, could become a legal norm. But Webb also reveals that this network has a financial arm. And that arm has a motive that has nothing to do with stopping terror criminals. Every institution within WEFPAC is connected by one thing. They all have a lot to lose if Bitcoin succeeds. And that brings us to a second organization so closely tied to it, the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or FSISAC.
FSISAC, their members include the biggest firms on Wall Street. Citigroup, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Morgan Stanley are among its members. And much of their leadership contributes to, works for, or chairs committees and initiatives of the World Economic Forum, including those focused on cybercrime and ransomware.
Its members are the most powerful institutions on the planet. And in 2021, they made a prediction about cryptocurrency. That prediction was so specific and so pointed that it tells you exactly how they intend to use the cybercrime narrative.
Dramatic increases in cryptocurrency valuation will drive threat actors to conduct campaigns capitalizing on this market, including extortion campaigns against financial institutions and their customers.
In other words, FSISAC claimed that rising cryptocurrency valuations would directly drive cybercrime. So if rising Bitcoin value causes crime, to stop the crime, you have to stop the value. But there is a catch to that argument, and Webb uses their own data to poke holes into it.
For instance, one recent study, ironically produced by WEFPAC member Chainalysis, found that only 0.34% of cryptocurrency transactions in 2020 were tied to criminal activity, down from 2% the year prior.
So why does the narrative keep getting louder?
However, cryptocurrency does present a threat to the plans of FSISAC members and their partners to begin producing digital currencies controlled either by approved commercial banks or central banks themselves, digital currencies that are designed to be easily surveilled.
She goes on to paint an even more damning picture of how this whole plan is being schemed right under our noses.
Central bank digital currencies in particular are being designed and implemented to erode financial privacy and autonomy. The success of CBDCs and related projects depends on neutering the competition.
The motive could not be any clearer. But a motive is nothing without a mechanism. And the mechanism these institutions are building right now is something that has never existed before in American history. Webb found the meeting where it was designed. In 2020, a gathering took place. On its own, the guest list is extraordinary, but it is the document the attendees produced together and the man who ran the organization hosting it that changes everything.
Carnegie Endowment's initiative brought together many members of WEFPAC and FSISAC with an important addition: representatives of central banks, namely the U.S. Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank. Also notably present in this initiative was the U.S.'s Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC.
The president of the Carnegie Endowment at the time was William Burns. Within a year, Biden appointed him CIA director. So what was on that report?
The report developed by these parties is astounding, as it states that the main cause of global financial instability is not irresponsible central bank policies or commercial banks engaging in criminal behavior, but instead, quote, the current fragmentation among stakeholders and initiatives.
But it's the solution that was more telling, and which Webb actually described as astounding.
They argue that the main solution needed to stabilize the global financial system lies in reducing that fragmentation. The only way to accomplish that, they say, requires the massive reorganization of all stakeholders.
The solution is neither accountability nor reform. They want commercial banks, financial regulators, and intelligence and law enforcement agencies to interact in unprecedented ways. That is code for merge.
A merging of commercial banks, their regulators, and the intelligence agencies is a complete nightmare scenario, but this is exactly what the World Economic Forum has come to promote as a model public-private partnership.
And these are the institutions demanding the right to decide who is a criminal and who is not. Which brings us to a question Webb asks that the press refuses to. What have these same institutions actually done with no consequences that would make any ordinary person a criminal for life?
The big banks like HSBC can launder millions of dollars for drug cartels. Nothing happens to them. No one goes to jail. The CIA has laundered untold millions through criminal banks like BCCI, a bank which ran its own sex trafficking operation involving prepubescent kids. And again, nothing was done. No one went to jail.
With all these in place, all that remains is the moment that makes the public accept all of it without question. Webb believes that moment is being planned, and the people planning it have already told us when. Every major expansion of government power in modern history has followed the same pattern. A crisis arrives, fear spikes, and laws that were never politically possible become inevitable overnight. Webb is not saying the next crisis will be manufactured. She is saying something more unsettling, that the people building these policies have already told us publicly with a specific timeline that a catastrophic event is coming.
Well, in January of this year, Jeremy Jurgens, number 2 at the WEF after Klaus Schwab, asserted that a, quote, catastrophic mutating event will strike the world in 2 years. What a confident prediction.
Webb also goes further to show you what happens when that event arrives, if Bitcoin is anywhere near the story.
It seems that a cyber 9/11 could be waiting in the wings, which of course would be followed shortly thereafter by a Cyber Patriot Act, or something very similar.
So what happens to public opinion once the alleged catastrophic moment occurs?
If Bitcoin is blamed for motivating or funding the cyber criminals deemed responsible for such a catastrophe, what will happen to public opinion, and what type of legislation might we see rammed through Congress?
Webb lays out exactly what happens next.
Bitcoin, privacy-minded crypto, and privacy-preserving technologies like encryption must become public enemy number 1 in order for the offered solution, a completely surveilled internet and completely surveilled financial system, to be accepted by the masses.
A complete financial lockdown will not involve tanks in the streets or boots on the ground. It will be a slow, coordinated, legally dressed construction of the infrastructure that makes dissent impossible and surveillance total.
Ultimately, what I'm trying to convey with this information is that the fight over the control of the cryptocurrency space is part of the larger war being fought over the future of our society, our country, and the world.
She poses a strong question, one that we would love to hear your thoughts about in the comments section below.